Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start with our feature, Dr. Denton Cooley, who died recently at the age of 96. And Denton Cooley was, if not the greatest heart surgeon of the 20th century, in the front row of the class photo. He was a good old boy from Houston, and among his accomplishments were the first heart transplant in the United States, the first artificial heart implantation in the United States. He was responsible for cell-saving techniques that reduced the need for transfusion in heart surgery. He started the Texas Heart Institute, which many people believe is the #1 heart surgery center in the world. And during this time, his team and he did over 120,000 operations. Technically, he was the best there was. Here is a Houston report on the life of Dr. Denton Cooley.
Born in the boom and bust of the 1920s, Denton Cooley grew up in Houston and nearly followed in the footsteps of his father, a prominent dentist.
He always expressed some regret that he didn't go through medical school. It was always my hope to become a physician, although I went to Austin, the university, originally, and I was planning to stay up there 2 years and then go to dental school. Then I began playing varsity basketball, and the coach enticed me to stay on for 4 full years to use up my athletic eligibility, and by then I was committed to going on to medical school. Chose UTMB. I attended every one of the operations that I could, standing up in the stall watching Dr. Singleton sulfurizing a tibia for osteomyelitis. I was fascinated by the whole surgical scene and the teamwork that went with surgery.
After 2 years on the Galveston shore, young Cooley headed up north to Johns Hopkins. A mentor by the name of Alfred Blaylock nurtured his talents and inspired many of his triumphs.
Dr. Blaylock had his big surgical clinic every Friday at noon.
Blaylock, himself a pioneer in heart surgery, took Cooley under his wing, and it was then that he discovered his true passions.
It was just inspiring. From that point forward, most of the surgery we did, what I call closed heart surgery, on the surface of the heart.
The 1960s rolled around, the dawn of heart transplant. On May 3rd, 1968, Denton Cooley made history.
It's just amazing that all the things that we've been able to witness. We had a patient who had advanced heart disease. We got a donor heart from a young girl who had taken her own life. I took this man's heart out and sewed this girl's heart in there. I tell you, one of the most exciting times of my life, and the biggest relief I almost ever had, was to take the clamp off the aorta, restore the coronary circulation into that donor heart, and see the thing slowly begin to work again. And by the next 30 minutes, that heart was just doing beautifully, and so that was really an exciting experience. I don't think anything can compare with it.
In 1969, another Cooley milestone. He was the first surgeon to transplant an artificial heart in man.
The possibility has now been established. The reality, the fact that Mr. Karp has regained organ function in terms of cerebral function and kidney function, indicates that its mechanical heart is a feasibility.
His legacy is embedded in hearts everywhere. From correcting congenital heart disease in newborns side by side with Blaylock, to full-on heart transplants he helped to perfect. From the Texas Heart Institute he built, to the medical minds he continues to inspire. Cooley's ingenuity and curiosity about the inner workings of the human heart have saved thousands of lives.
It used to be that the doctor had a little black case with his stethoscope and his sphygmomanometer in it and a few basic medications, and that was medicine. But now today, look at the things we're doing. I've always thought, and I take my inspiration from other surgeons, that maybe I started a school of surgery, and that people, and my trainees and so on, people who've been exposed to our program here, will go out and say that they learned their surgery from Denton Cooley. There's no question in my mind. I just marvel at the things that have happened to me, the opportunities that I have had to meet all these fabulous people, all the crowned heads, and presidents of nations and so on. After all, I'm just another surgeon from South Texas.
When we talk about the surgeries he's done, you can see that he was not only the most prolific, but one of the first. He trained in Houston under Michael DeBakey, who, if Denton Cooley is not the greatest heart surgeon in the 20th century, it's possible Michael DeBakey was. They were the Ruth and Gehrig, and there's a little more to their story. But here's Bud Frazier, one of his trainees and one of the Texas Heart Institute administrators, to tell a little bit more about Denton Cooley.
The first open heart surgery here in April of 1956. Now, there were two other centers doing heart surgery at the time, the Mayo Clinic, University of Minnesota. By the end of the year, 1956, he had done more surgery than the two programs combined, and he continued to do so for the next 35 years. He did more heart surgery than anyone in the world.
He helped to refine, improve, and expand the use of a heart-lung machine that bought surgeons precious hours, not minutes, within the human heart. The expanded use of this life-saving machine helped set in motion a surgical career in which Dr. Cooley and his team would perform more than 100,000 open heart surgeries. His awards included the country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and its highest science award, the National Medal of Technology and Innovation.
Well, I mentioned Michael DeBakey. He and Denton Cooley had a well-publicized feud. It was the most famous feud in medicine. In fact, it made the cover of Life magazine in 1970. It was about Cooley's use of the artificial heart. DeBakey had developed it. He didn't think it was ready for use in humans. Cooley and one of DeBakey's co-researchers essentially stole the heart from DeBakey's lab and implanted it when DeBakey was out of town. DeBakey didn't like that, and essentially the feud between the two greatest heart surgeons of our generation went on for almost 40 years before they patched it up as old men. Cooley left Baylor and went back to the Texas Heart Institute he had founded, and here he talks about the Texas Heart Institute.
I think it began in the mid-1950s when open heart surgery was first introduced in our Texas Medical Center. Before long, my program here at St. Luke's and Children's Hospital was probably the most prolific of all institutions in the country, including the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, and we had a simplified technique of open heart surgery and soon began a leadership position in this new field of cardiac surgery. Well, then I decided to create this institute in 1962, so it's been a little over 50 years ago. Our Heart Institute was created with two objectives, that is, research and education. So in each of those aspects of our history, I think there's certain exciting things that have happened. Well, I think that it shows the evolution of cardiac surgery. First, we started off replacing just some of the components of the human heart, that is, the valves and the great vessels, and modifying the ventricles and that sort of thing. And then the big breakthrough came in 1968 when we did the first successful heart transplant to replace the entire organ. And that was really an exciting period that followed that. Our initial work in transplantation, we did, I think, about 15 or 20 heart transplants in that early era. But so many of these patients suffered from rejection of the tissues. But in the early 1980s, a new breakthrough came with the development of a drug called cyclosporine, which is still in use today and has made it possible for some patients to survive transplantation for 20 or 30 years. So it's a really big change. Satisfaction to me to see how this institution and our whole medical center has grown during my lifetime. I think that we have done a great deal to reach our original objective of research and education. But at the same time, we've made many advances in just clinical medicine and surgery. We have enjoyed a leadership position in this new development now, inspiring the entire medical community around the world. You can find large cardiac programs growing in Europe and South America and elsewhere in North America. Just amazing to see how rapidly it's expanded.
Denton Cooley, one of the greats. Well, we're going to move on now to Ralph Branca, who died recently at the age of 90, the great pitcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers, known for one pitch. We did our first podcast on Bobby Thomson, and Ralph Branca was the one who served up that ninth-inning home run that shot her around the world that won the pennant for the Giants in 1951. Here are two of the greats, Ernie Harwell and Red Barber, to talk about that game.
In the eighth, the Dodgers got to Magley for 3 runs, and Dodger fans saw victory at long last. Big Don Newcomb faltered in the ninth. Ralph Branca, who lost the opener, comes on the scene with one giant run across and two on base. The fans sense the drama of the situation and the irony, for Branca has to pitch to Bobby Thomson, who homered off him only 2 days ago. Branca's first pitch to Thomson is a strike, and here is pitch number 2.
Nobody has come up to me over the years and said that they heard my broadcast. People talk about Russ Hodges and his broadcast.
Branca throws. There's a long pass. It's going to be, I believe. The Giants won the pennant. 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 Bobby Thomson hits into the lower deck of the left field stand. The Giants won the pennant, and they're going crazy. They're going crazy.
A fan in Brooklyn who hated the Giants turned his tape machine on when Russ was broadcasting in the 9th inning and taped Russ saying the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant. It was sent to Russ. He gave the man $10, Chesterfield cigarette, to put it out on a record. It became the most famous single sports broadcast of all time, and there was no replay on television, no filming of what I said, and only Mrs. Harwell and I know that I was on TV that day.
Here's another immortal, Vince Scully, who knew Ralph Branca.
When Bobby hit the home run, but as soon as the initial impact, I immediately leaned over the booth and looked down to Ann, his wife-to-be, and I watched her very calmly open up her purse, take out a handkerchief, close the purse, spread open the handkerchief, and then bring it up to her face. I'll never forget that. I then leave the press box, and as I walked in the door to go up the steps, there's my pal, Ralph Branca, and he is stretched out, face down on the steps. And I have to actually step over him to go upstairs into where the training room and the lockers were. And that was really painful. But I knew that you couldn't say hang in there. You just let it go. And the one blessing for him, he was going to be married shortly thereafter. And then they went away on their honeymoon. And a very delightful guy who I really and truly think came out of the situation like a giant, to be a Dodger and be a giant. But I mean that because he withstood so much criticism, so much pain. And in New York, it seemed like every year there'd be some baseball dinner. They would invite Bobby Thomson, and they'd invite Ralph. And, of course, Bobby was hailed the hero, and Ralph was the guy who made the pitch. And yet he never whimpered, and he had plenty of rights to, because years later, the Wall Street Journal had a big article how the Giants were stealing signs, and that's how it happened. I would just say I think Ralph carried his cross better than most and came out even bigger than life than he is.
Here's Ralph Branca himself.
I remember this throwing a home run pitch, to Thomson. And I look at it and I, often wonder about it that, first of all, the manager made a mistake. We played the first game at home and the last two away. Don't ask me why. Should have been the other way around. Play the first game away and now you're home for 2 games. When being home is a big thing. As it proved, the Giants hit a home run in the 9th and we didn't have an at-bat because they were home. Justin did that on his own. Charlie was smarter than anybody else. Just ask him. I'd say, I was like the youngest guy to win 20 games at that point in time. I won 21 at 21. Really what I'd want to be remembered as. Plenty proud because, I was the first guy to do that. Subsequently, the game changed and the younger guys got to play more, so there are more 21-year-old guys win 20. But, I was the youngest guy to do that at that point in time.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. Ralph Branca was a classy guy. Most people don't know that he was one of the first people to befriend Jackie Robinson when he joined the Dodgers. He mentioned that although the game was in the Polo Grounds, it could have been in Ebbets Field if the Dodgers manager had selected the last 2 games to be in Ebbets Field rather than the first game. So we're going to close tonight with the chairman of the board singing about Ebbets Field, where Ralph Branca did most of his pitching.
And there used to be a ballpark where the field was warm and green, and the people played their crazy game with a joy I had never seen. Yes, there used to be a ballpark right here